262, Flavius Josephus, a Jewish historian serving Rome, reveals something incredible. An execution took place in Jerusalem. A high priest ordered a man to be stoned to death. The victim, the brother of Jesus. But this is not the only incredible discovery identifying Jesus as a real person. In Jerusalem in 2002, a 2,000-year-old stone box was discovered. Carved into it in Aramaic was a 6-word inscription: James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. These are real artifacts that provide compelling evidence that Jesus of Nazareth truly existed. And today we're going to see real images of every one of them. We're going to examine the 12 specific discoveries that confirm his existence, what they prove, where they are today, and why skeptics can't explain them. Stay until the end, because here's something incredible. It was Jesus' own enemies, Roman historians and the rabbis who condemned him, who unintentionally left behind the most powerful evidence that Jesus truly existed. The Talmud, the writings of the rabbis. This evidence is found in the last place you'd expect, the Talmud, the sacred tradition of the rabbis who rejected Jesus. In the Babylonian Talmud, the text names Jesus directly in Aramaic, Yeshu the Nazarene. The passage in the tractate Sanhedrin states, "On the eve of Passover, Yeshu was hanged because he practiced sorcery and enticed Israel, leading it astray." The Gospels say the same thing. A man who did things no one could explain. The same accusation, leading the people away from the faith of their leaders. The same time of death, Passover. But here's the detail that changes everything. The rabbis never wrote, "It was all a lie." That would have been the easiest way to bury his memory. Instead, they admitted that he did extraordinary things and called it sorcery. They did not deny the facts. They simply changed the explanation, and that is the most powerful evidence there could be. If even those who wanted to erase Jesus admitted that he lived, performed astonishing deeds and was executed, then his existence is no longer in question. His own enemies confirmed it. The leaders of Israel remembered him, and they hated him. But what about the Roman Empire? Tacitus, the historian who hated Christians. On a tragic night in July of the year 64, Rome is in flames. The Great Fire consumes entire neighborhoods of the imperial capital, and the people begin whispering one name: Nero. The emperor needs someone to blame, and fast. He finds his scapegoat in a small, despised group, the Christians. He has them arrested and condemned, and some are burned alive as human torches to light up the night. Half a century later, around the year 116 AD, Rome's most important historian writes his account of that fire. His name is Tacitus. He is no ordinary chronicler. He is an aristocrat with access to the imperial archives, and he has no sympathy for Christians. But while recounting the massacre, he pauses. He has to explain to his readers who these Christians were. He writes that they take their name from Christus, that this Christus was executed during the reign of Emperor Tiberius, that the sentence was handed down by a specific official, Pontius Pilate, and that the movement began in Judea and spread from there all the way to Rome itself, more than 1,200 miles away. Name, time, judge, and place. The same 4 details given in the Gospels, confirmed by an enemy. And there is no way to accuse Tacitus of wanting to help the Christians. In the same passage, he calls Christianity a destructive superstition in Annals 1544, and describes it as a disease spreading through the capital. That contempt is exactly what makes his testimony so valuable. A man who despised Christianity had no reason to invent its founder. He was simply recording what Rome knew. Today, it can be read word for word in Book 15 of the Annals, Rome's record of the execution of Jesus. But the most valuable witness to this story was not Roman. He was Jewish, a priest, and had fought against the Roman Empire with his own hands. His name was Josephus. He was born in Jerusalem into an aristocratic priestly family, and when the Jews revolted against Rome in the year 66, he commanded the rebels in Galilee. He was defeated and captured. Then he did something that saved his life. He switched sides. He adopted the imperial family name, Flavius, and eventually wrote the history of his people for Roman readers. A man like that had no interest in promoting Christianity. He was writing for the empire that regarded Christians as criminals. Around the year 93, he published Antiquities of the Jews. When he reaches the time of Pilate, he writes, "At that time there was a man named Jesus, a wise man, a doer of astonishing deeds, a teacher. Pilate condemned him to the cross at the urging of the leading men among us, but those who had loved him before did not cease to do so. A teacher who performed astonishing deeds was condemned by Pilate, and whose followers did not scatter after his death." Skeptics criticized this passage, arguing that later Christian copyists might have added the information. But then an ancient Arabic version of the passage came to light, preserving Josephus's original words. It merely says that he was believed to be the Messiah, exactly the kind of phrase a Jew who did not believe in Jesus would use. But Josephus mentions Jesus a second time, and no one disputes this second reference. The year is 62. The Roman governor of Judea suddenly dies in office, and his replacement is still on his way from Rome. The high priest Ananus sees his opportunity. He convenes a Sanhedrin, the Jewish court, without Roman authorization, which was forbidden, and sentences a man to death. The man is stoned to death. Josephus records the scandal, and so his Roman readers will know who the victim was. He identifies him with a single phrase, James, the brother of Jesus who was called Christ. Antiquities 2200. And here is what makes those words so valuable. Josephus is not preaching. He is recounting a political crime, and Jesus is mentioned only in passing, like someone saying, so-and-so's brother. No one uses a fictional character to identify the real victim of a murder. That is why the vast majority of scholars, including non-believers, accept this passage as authentic. But what we are about to see next makes this even more astonishing. The ossuary of Jesus' brother. In 2002, an expert in ancient inscriptions from the Sorbonne in Paris was examining the private collection of a collector named Golan. Among dozens of artifacts, a limestone box about 1.5 feet long stopped him in his tracks. It's an ossuary. This type of burial box was used exclusively in the Jerusalem area during a window of just 90 years, until the city was destroyed in the year 70. The Jews of that era practiced double burial. They left the body to decompose in a niche for a year, then collected the bones and placed them in a stone box. When Jerusalem fell, the custom vanished with it. In other words, this box dates back to the time when James was stoned, around the year 62. And scratched into one side in ancient Aramaic are 20 letters. Yaakov bar Yosef, Akui de Yeshua. James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. Among the thousands of known Jewish ossuaries, the deceased was identified by his father. That was the rule. A brother's name was added in fewer than 2% of cases, and only for one reason. That brother was more famous than the father. It's true that James, Joseph, and Jesus were very common names in first-century Judea. But a statistician from Tel Aviv University cross-referenced the data. The frequency of those three names, Jerusalem's population of about 80,000, and the relevant time period. According to his calculations, the combination, James, son of Joseph, with a prominent brother named Jesus, yields roughly 1.7 men, practically a single family in the entire city. The ossuary did not come from a controlled excavation. Golan claimed he bought it in the village of Silwan in the 1970s for about $200, without understanding for decades what the inscription said. No one knows where the original tomb was, its exact location, or what surrounded it. And there are no bones. Without remains, DNA testing is impossible. Yehohanan, the nail that silenced the skeptics. In 1968, an incredible discovery was made, a human heel pierced by a 4 1/3-inch iron nail. Excavators were preparing land for housing northeast of Jerusalem when the ground suddenly gave way. They had broken through the roof of a first-century tomb. Inside was an ossuary bearing a Jewish name, crudely scratched into its surface. Yehohanan, or John. Archaeologically, this is extraordinarily important. It is one of the very few pieces of physical evidence of Roman crucifixion preserved anywhere in the world, and it survived because of an accident. When the executioner hammered in the nail, its tip struck a hard knot in the wood of the cross and bent like a hook. After the execution, they could not pull it out. To take down the body, they had to amputate the foot. And so the nail went into the tomb with its victim, sealed in stone until the present day. With a single blow, that bent nail refutes two arguments skeptics repeated for years. First, they claimed that crucifixions used ropes, not nails, and that the Gospels had exaggerated. Yehohanan's heel proves otherwise. In first-century Judea, Rome fastened condemned men to crosses with solid iron nails, exactly as the Gospel accounts describe. Second, and even more importantly, critical scholars insisted that Rome would never have allowed a crucified man to receive a proper burial. Therefore, they argued, the stone tomb where Joseph of Arimathea placed Jesus' body was an impossible invention. But Yehohanan was crucified, and his remains were found carefully gathered in an ossuary inside a family tomb carved from stone, buried according to Jewish rites. What they insisted was impossible actually exists. This proves something profound. Every detail of Good Friday, the iron nails, the wood of the cross, the body released to a family, the tomb carved into rock, was part of the reality of Jerusalem in those years. The Gospels were not describing a scene of fantasy. Pliny's letter to the emperor. The year is 112. In Bithynia, a Roman province in what is now Turkey, more than 600 miles from Jerusalem, a governor faces a problem he does not know how to solve. The governor is Pliny the Younger, and he holds the power of life and death over the entire region. Even so, he writes to Emperor Trajan asking for instructions. There are so many Christians that he no longer knows what to do. He interrogates them, threatens them, and executes those who refuse to renounce their faith. Yet more keep appearing. His letter is, in effect, a Roman intelligence report on the early church. Pliny records that they meet in secret before dawn, that they sing hymns to Christ as to a god, Letters 1096, that they pledge not to steal, commit fraud, or commit adultery. To uncover the truth, he even tortured two enslaved women whom the community called ministers, that is, deaconesses. That is all he found. No crime. Only an executed man whom entire multitudes worshipped as God. And here is what that letter reveals. Less than a century has passed since the crucifixion, and a Roman governor at the far end of the empire is no longer asking who Christ was. He is asking how to stop people willing to be tortured for him. And there is an even earlier trace. The Roman historian Suetonius records that around the year 49, Emperor Claudius expelled from Rome the Jews who were causing disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus. If that Chrestus was Christ, as many believe, the message was already sparking debates in the synagogues of the imperial capital just 15 or 20 years after the crucifixion. The New Testament speaks of this same expulsion. The book of Acts says that when Paul arrived in Corinth, he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all Jews to leave Rome. Pliny's letter survived in its entirety, along with the emperor's reply. Today it can be read in the 10th book of his correspondence. Two officials of the most powerful empire on earth, discussing in writing what to do with the followers of a carpenter crucified in Judea. The Alexamenus Graffito, the mockery that became evidence. The oldest known depiction of Jesus on the cross began as an insult. It lies in the heart of Rome, on the Palatine Hill, where the emperors lived. There, on the plaster wall of an ancient school for imperial pages, someone scratched a crude drawing near the end of the 2nd century. It shows a crucified man but with the head of a donkey. Facing the cross, a young man raises his hand in worship. And underneath, in poorly written Greek, are the words, Alexamenos worships his God. It's a mockery. a pagan peer ridiculing a young Christian named Alexamenos so everyone would laugh at him, the ancient equivalent of a meme. And here is the ultimate irony, that mockery is the earliest image of the crucified Jesus ever found. It wasn't made by a Christian, it was made by someone who despised Christians. The graffiti proves that Jesus' crucifixion was public knowledge, even in the halls of the imperial palace. And to a Roman, worshipping a crucified man was the ultimate disgrace. The cross was a punishment reserved for slaves and criminals. It would be like worshipping a man executed in the electric chair today. No one invents a god like that to attract followers. Christians carried the burden of that scandal because they couldn't change it. It was what had happened, and the graffiti is not alone. In that same 2nd century, Lucian of Samosata, a pagan satirist, mocked Christians in his writings. He describes them as people who call one another brothers, who despise death, and who live by the laws of their founder, a man he calls that crucified sophist in Palestine. For the joke to work, his audience had to know whom he meant, a real teacher, with real followers, executed in a real place. Lucian probably learned the story from Christians themselves, but not even pagan comedy questioned whether that man had existed. There is even a letter from a Syrian father, Mara bar Serapion, written from prison to his son. He compares 3 wise men who were unjustly killed, Socrates, Pythagoras, and the wise king of the Jews, and asks what the Jews gained by executing him. It does not name him directly, and its date is disputed, so it carries less weight. But it fits the same pattern. Throughout the ancient world, friends and enemies spoke of the same executed man. Rabbis who accused him of sorcery, Roman historians who despised him, imperial pages scratching mockery into the palace walls. None of them had any reason to invent a messiah. They simply took a fact everyone knew and, without meaning to, left behind proof that he existed. That graffiti still exists. It was removed from the wall in the 19th century and is now on display at the Palatine Museum in Rome. Anyone can stand before it and see, scratched into plaster 1800 years ago, the mockery that became evidence. James, the brother of Jesus, the evidence no one can deny. There is a 2,000-year-old letter in which a man admits, almost without realizing it, that he knew Jesus' own brother. Paul of Tarsus, in his letter to the Galatians, is not preaching. He is defending himself against an accusation and giving an account of his travels. And there is one crucial detail for understanding his testimony. Paul never saw Jesus in person. His only encounter was with an apparition of the resurrected Jesus, years after his death. So, to learn who that flesh and blood man had been, Paul relied on those who had actually known him. And in the middle of that account, he says that after his conversion, he went up to Jerusalem and spent 15 days with Peter. Then he adds, "I saw none of the other apostles, only James, the Lord's brother." 15 days eating and sleeping under the same roof as the men who walked with Jesus, and a face-to-face encounter with the man who grew up in the same home as he did. And this is no isolated reference. In the same letter, Paul describes James as a pillar of the Jerusalem community, one of its highest-ranking leaders. And in another letter, he mentions the Brothers of the Lord as a group known throughout all the churches with recognized privileges. Now let's connect the dots. An apostle writes, while the eyewitnesses were still alive, that he personally knew Jesus' brother. Decades later, Josephus, the Jewish historian in the service of Rome whom we discussed earlier, records the murder of that same James, stoned to death by order of the high priest in the year 62. Two authors who never knew each other, writing for opposing audiences, point to the same flesh and blood person, and here the skeptic is trapped. If Jesus was a myth, who was this James, so real that he was executed? Why did everyone in Jerusalem publicly call him the brother of Jesus? How did he come to lead the community, and why did the high priest order his death? Myths don't have biological brothers. Nazareth, the town that didn't exist. Nazareth does not appear even once in the Old Testament. It does not appear in the early Talmud. And the historian Flavius Josephus, who named 45 cities and villages in Galilee, never mentions it. For years, this was one of the main arguments against the existence of Jesus. The conclusion spread quickly. If the town never existed, then Jesus of Nazareth must be a fictional character. In 2008, a book titled The Myth of Nazareth turned that claim into a rallying cry for modern skepticism. But the argument confused insignificance with non-existence. The final books of the Old Testament were written centuries before Roman-era Nazareth. They could not mention a place that was not yet important. And just 4 miles away stood Sepphoris, a major city that overshadowed everything around it. No one writes chronicles about the tiny hamlet next door. The definitive answer came with shovels. In December 2009, the Israel Antiquities Authority began excavating beside the Basilica of the Annunciation in the heart of modern-day Nazareth. Beneath the ground, archaeologists uncovered the first-century home ever found in Nazareth. The excavators found something else, a concealed pit dug beneath the floor, a hiding place prepared by the residents and linked to the years of the Great Jewish Revolt against Rome. That family was so real that they prepared to survive a war. What remained was to prove that the inhabitants were Jewish, as the Gospels claim. The evidence came from the earth, fragments of limestone vessels. Only strictly observant Jewish communities used stone containers because, under their purity laws, stone could not become ritually impure. Those vessels are the unmistakable signature of a practicing Jewish community. Piece by piece, the village emerged from the earth. Roman-era Jewish tombs surrounded the settlement, and because tombs were dug outside the village, they mark its exact boundaries, along with agricultural terraces, wine presses, silos, quarries, and watchtowers. In 1962, a fragment of a Hebrew inscription from the 3rd or 4th century was discovered in Caesarea Maritima. It listed the priestly families relocated to Galilee after the destruction of the temple, and one of those families had been assigned a destination chiseled into the stone, Nazareth. It is the oldest Jewish written reference to the village, and it was not carved by a Christian. One question remains that skeptics cannot answer. If you were inventing a Messiah to conquer the empire, you would have him born in Jerusalem, Rome, Alexandria, or at least Bethlehem, the city of David foretold by prophecy. No one invents their God in a tiny hamlet mocked even by its neighbors. The gospel itself preserves that contempt. Can anything good come from Nazareth? Such an awkward detail is not invented. It is remembered. Jesus Christ is God, carved in stone. Beneath the floor of a maximum security prison in northern Israel, a phrase was discovered that shatters the most widely repeated myth about Jesus. The myth goes like this: Jesus was merely a human teacher until the year 325, when Emperor Constantine declared him God for political convenience at the Council of Nicaea. Millions of people still repeat it today as fact. Archaeology tells a different story. At Megiddo, excavations beneath that modern prison uncovered a 3rd century mosaic floor, the remains of one of the oldest Christian prayer spaces ever found. And on that floor, in Greek letters formed from tiny stones, is a dedication. It records that a Christian woman named Akeptus donated a table for the Eucharist, or the Lord's Supper, and it says, whom she offered it to God Jesus Christ, as a memorial. There it is, written in stone, God Jesus Christ, generations before Constantine, before the Council of Nicaea, before Christianity was even legal in the empire. No emperor ordered those words. They were dedicated by an ordinary woman when professing that faith could still cost her life. And the mosaic preserves an even more astonishing detail. It was funded by a centurion in the Roman army, an officer of the very empire that nailed Jesus to the cross, paid to build a place where he could be worshipped. 2 centuries after Good Friday, the empire that had executed him as a criminal was beginning to worship him. Christianity's oldest creed. There's an argument skeptics have repeated for more than a century, and it sounds convincing. The story of Jesus was supposedly a slowly evolving legend, a myth built layer by layer over hundreds of years after no one was left alive to dispute it. But there's one document that shatters that theory, and it isn't a gospel, it's a letter. The Apostle Paul never wrote a gospel. Instead, he sent letters to the earliest Christian communities to guide them and answer their questions. One of those letters was sent to the church in Corinth, Greece. And in that letter, before listing the appearances of Jesus, Paul writes, "I passed on to you what I myself received." Those two verbs, pass on and receive, are no coincidence. They are technical terms from Rabbinic Judaism for a memorized oral tradition, passed word for word from teacher to disciple. Paul isn't inventing a story. He's reciting a formula that predates him. And here's the explosive detail. Historians date the creation of this creed to between 36 and 60 months after the crucifixion. Not 300 years, not even 30, just 3 to 5 years. And that creed doesn't stand alone. We also have the four Gospels, and here's something many people don't know. They aren't four copies of the same book. Mark wrote his account first. Matthew and Luke drew from parts of it, but each added information the others didn't have. And John wrote his independently, without relying on the other three. In other words, they are distinct testimonies from different authors, all telling the exact same story. All these books share the same elements. A Jewish teacher from Galilee, from a town called Nazareth, with disciples and a public ministry no one could explain, crucified under Pontius Pilate. In the sands of Egypt, a credit card-sized scrap of papyrus was discovered, Papyrus P52, a fragment of chapter 18 of the Gospel of John, the scene of the trial before Pilate, dated between the years 125 and 175. A text about a condemned man executed in Judea was already being copied and carried down the Nile, more than 100 miles from where it all happened, just a few generations later. Toward the end of the 1st century, Clement of Rome wrote about Jesus, while the final texts of the New Testament were still being produced. Soon after, Ignatius of Antioch, on his way to be executed, insisted that Jesus had truly been crucified under Pilate and had truly suffered. Then came Polycarp, then Papias, an unbroken chain upheld by communities that would rather die than deny the story. Even the apocryphal Gospels, those later texts excluded from the Bible, confirm something simple. No one writes imitations of a man who left no trace. The Pilate stone and the Caiaphas ossuary, the two judges. For centuries, thousands of people walked over the name of Pontius Pilate without knowing it. In 1961, a team of Italian archaeologists was excavating the ruins of the Roman theater at Caesarea Maritima, overlooking the Mediterranean, when they turned over one of its old steps. It was a reused block of limestone, and on its hidden face, several lines remained chiseled in Latin, Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea. The inscription was the dedication of a Tiberium, a temple honoring Emperor Tiberius, and it was carved during Pilate's own rule, between the years 26 and 36, exactly the period when the Gospels place the crucifixion. Centuries later, when the theater was remodeled, someone reused the slab as an ordinary step. Until that day, Pilate had been only a name on parchment. Now he existed in stone. And there is one crucial detail. The stone preserves his exact title, prefect, the military office Rome used in Judea during those early years, just as the Gospels indicate. Decades later, the term procurator became more common, and even the Roman historian Tacitus used it when writing about Pilate. The stone, carved while Pilate was still in power, corrects even Tacitus. But Pilate did not judge Jesus alone. The year is 1990, in the Peace Forest, south of Jerusalem. Excavators are preparing the site for a water park when a machine strikes the stone roof of a cave. The ground gives way, revealing a 1st century family tomb. Inside are several ossuaries, stone boxes used to hold the bones of the dead. One stands out from all the rest. It is richly decorated, the kind only Jerusalem's highest aristocracy could afford. and carved into one side is a name in Aramaic, Yehoseph bar Caiapha, Joseph, son of Caiaphas. Inside the box are the bones of a man around 60 years old. The name, age, wealth, and time period all match the high priest who led the religious trial against Jesus before handing him over to Rome. And here is what is incredible. The two judges of Good Friday, the Roman governor and the Jewish high priest, were real officials whose remains archaeology could uncover. One left his name carved in stone beneath the son of Caesarea, the other his own bones in a tomb in Jerusalem. Today, the Pilate stone is on display at the Israel Museum. Anyone can stand before it and read, 2,000 years later, the name and title of the man who sentenced Jesus of Nazareth. Peter's house in Capernaum. On the shores of the Sea of Galilee, in the village of Capernaum, stands a modern church that does not touch the ground. It is suspended on massive pillars with a glass floor at its center. And beneath the glass, about 10 feet below, you can see the black stone walls of a 2,000-year-old house. The Gospels tell us that Jesus had a base of operations, Capernaum, by the lake. And within Capernaum, Peter's house. There he healed the apostle's mother-in-law, who was bedridden with a fever. And when he returned to the village, the text simply says that word spread, that he was at home. In 1968, Franciscan archaeologists began excavating beneath the ruins of an ancient octagonal Byzantine church. And underneath, they found exactly what the Gospels describe: a humble first-century fisherman's home with walls of black basalt, just steps from the village synagogue. But what is astonishing is not the house. It is what happened to it. Toward the end of the 1st century, one of its rooms changed completely. The household pottery, the pots, plates, and remnants of cooking disappeared. The walls were covered in plaster, an extremely rare luxury in a poor Galilean home. Someone stopped living there, and people began gathering there instead. And on that plaster, visitors left their mark. Graffiti, scratched by Christian pilgrims, with invocations to Christ in Greek and other languages. People traveled to that specific room in that specific village. The chain remains unbroken. In the 4th century, a pilgrim named Egeria visited the site and recorded that the house of the Prince of the Apostles had been turned into a church. In the 5th century, the octagonal church was built over it. And that detail matters. The octagon was the architectural hallmark the Byzantines reserved for holy sites. To be precise, no inscription says, "Peter lived here." What archaeology does prove is that, from a very early date and without interruption, the first Christians venerated an actual 1st century home in the exact town where the Gospels place Jesus' daily life. And it still exists. Anyone can enter that elevated church in Capernaum, stand on the glass floor, and look down at the black basalt walls of the room where, according to centuries of continuous tradition, Jesus ate, slept, and healed the sick. The house where he lived matches the texts, but the gospel most fiercely attacked by skeptics, the Gospel of John, accused for decades of being nothing more than invented theology, contained even more precise coordinates, and the soil of Jerusalem has just given them back. Bonus: the Pool of Siloam, the site of the miracle, unearthed by accident. The year is 2004, in the city of David, south of ancient Jerusalem. A municipal crew is repairing a broken sewer pipe when an excavator scrapes the ground and strikes something solid. Broad, ancient stone steps, precisely carved. Archaeologists are called in. And what emerges from the earth, shovelful by shovelful, is a monumental pool from the Second Temple period, the time of Jesus, with broad staircases descending to the water, carved corners, and, among the rubble, 1st century coins that date it beyond doubt. It is the Pool of Siloam. That name matters. The Gospel of John tells us that when Jesus encountered a man who had been blind from birth, he rubbed mud on the man's eyes and sent him to wash in that very place, the Pool of Siloam. The man went, washed, and came back able to see. For centuries, critics dismissed the pool as a theological symbol that had never physically existed. A broken pipe proved it was beneath the street, and it is not the only setting described by John to emerge from the ground. The same gospel describes another pool in Jerusalem, the Pool of Bethesda, where another healing took place, and includes a strange architectural detail. It says the pool had 5 porticos, meaning 5 covered colonnades. A rectangular pool has 4 sides, so that 5th portico sounded like the invention of someone who had never set foot in the city. Then, excavations beside the Church of St. Anne revealed the answer. It was not one pool, but 2 adjoining pools, with a central portico running right between them. 4 around the sides plus 1 in the middle. Exactly 5. And here is the detail that changes everything. In the year 70, the Roman legions razed Jerusalem to the ground. No one writing generations later from far away could have reconstructed from memory the layout of a city that no longer existed. John's details could only have been known by someone familiar with Jerusalem before its destruction, the Jerusalem where Jesus walked. The settings of the most frequently cited miracles are excavated sites, complete with dates, coins, and steps. And those steps are still there. Today, any visitor can walk down Siloam's stone staircase, the same one climbed 2,000 years ago by a man who arrived blind and left able to see. Houses, pools, stones bearing the names of judges. The entire map of the Gospels continues to emerge from the ground. You have seen the evidence that Jesus existed. But there is something even more astonishing. The exact places where his feet once walked are still there, and today you can see them with your own eyes. In the video on your screen, I'll show you 14 of those places, what they look like today, what archaeologists found beneath each one, and why they confirm stone by stone that the Bible tells the truth. Because it's one thing to know that Jesus was real, and something else entirely to walk on the very ground where he preached, healed, and was crucified.